There is a body in front of you. You put it there. Your hands aren't shaking. You're not in shock. You're scanning the tree line, checking your left flank, counting how many more there might be. The calculation happened before you were aware of it. Threat level, proximity, the probability that this was a scout. You made the right call. You know this the way you know how to breathe. That composure doesn't feel like you. Or maybe it feels exactly like you. And that's the part you've never wanted to look at directly. Because everything your brain just did, the rapid threat assessment, the suppression of hesitation, the clean execution, that sequence wasn't invented by circumstance. It was inherited, refined across 200,000 years of an environment where the person standing next to you was sometimes the most dangerous thing in the world. Ancient humans were not peaceful creatures who occasionally fell into violence. They were expert killers who occasionally chose not to be. And the distance between them and you is much smaller than anyone has told you. In 2016, José María Gómez and his team at the University of Granada published a paper in Nature that reframed the entire debate about human violence. They analyzed lethal violence rates across 1,024 mammal species, over 4 million data points, and constructed a phylogenetic map of how likely any given species is to kill its own kind. The average mammal kills members of its own species at a rate of 0.3%. Humans registered at approximately 2%, 6 times the mammalian baseline, and crucially, that figure was consistent across continents, across time periods, across cultures that had never made contact with each other. This was not a regional phenomenon or a historical accident. Gómez called it a phylogenetic signal, meaning the tendency toward lethal intraspecific violence is written into our evolutionary lineage as a baseline trait. Steven Pinker has used this data to argue that modern institutions have made us dramatically less violent than our ancestors, and he is technically correct. But the argument quietly sidesteps the more disturbing implication. The capacity has not changed. Your brain was not updated when laws were invented. The reduction in violence is entirely a function of external containment structures. Remove those structures, and every study of conflict, crowd psychology, and institutional collapse points to the same conclusion. The baseline reasserts itself within days. Lawrence Keeley spent decades at the University of Illinois cataloging archaeological evidence of prehistoric warfare. His book, War Before Civilization, documented something that the academic community at the time found deeply uncomfortable. The percentage of a prehistoric population killed by other humans regularly exceeded anything the 20th century produced, including both world wars, as a proportion of total population. Some communities lost 30 to 60% of their adult males per generation to organized violence, not invasion, not war in the modern sense, raids, ambushes, targeted killings. Your brain was built in that environment. It was shaped by selection pressure that rewarded the capacity to calculate, to suppress empathy on command, and to execute violence efficiently. That pressure did not stop shaping you until approximately 10,000 years ago. The institutions that replaced it are, evolutionarily speaking, brand new. The site at Crow Creek, South Dakota, tells you what that world looked like in concrete terms. In 1978, archaeologists excavated a mass grave containing 486 individuals, men, women, and children. Radiocarbon dating placed the event at approximately 1325 CE. Every single skull in that grave showed evidence of scalping. Most showed perimortem fractures, injuries that happened at or just around the time of death. Many had been dismembered. The bodies were left exposed for a period, partially scavenged by animals, then gathered and buried together. This was not a natural disaster. It was a tactical operation carried out against an entire community. Bioarchaeologist Jane Wickstra developed the methods that allow researchers to distinguish intentional trauma from accident and disease. What her methods revealed, applied to sites across every inhabited continent, was a consistent forensic signature. Perifractures on forearm bones from defensive actions, depressed cranial fractures from blunt weapons, cut marks on ribs consistent with stabbing wounds, perimortem trauma to the back of the skull. These patterns appear in the earliest anatomically modern human skeletal remains we have recovered. The Neanderthal individual recovered from Shanidar Cave in Iraq, approximately 50,000 years old, carries a healed puncture wound consistent with a projectile. Craniofacial trauma is among the most consistently documented findings across every major prehistoric skeletal collection in the world. But the violence documented in the archaeological record was not random. Analysis of victim demographics shows consistent patterns of selective targeting. Certain individuals were killed outright. Others were captured. Others were left untouched. In some sites, the pattern of injuries suggests sequential execution rather than battle chaos. This requires a theory of mind applied under extreme stress, the ability to sort people in real time by threat level, utility, and value, and act accordingly. That is not the behavior of an animal overwhelmed by instinct. That is strategic cognition operating in a context of lethal violence. In August 1971, Philip Zimbardo converted the basement of Stanford University's Jordan Hall into a mock prison. 24 male college students, all screened for psychological health and stability, all randomly assigned, became either guards or prisoners. The experiment was designed to run for 2 weeks. Zimbardo shut it down after 6 days. Within 36 hours, the guards had begun to psychologically abuse the prisoners. Not all of them, and not in the same way, but the transformation was rapid, consistent, and completely unpredicted by any personality measure taken before the experiment began. The students who became cruel had not been identified as having any predisposition toward cruelty. Zimbardo called this the Lucifer effect, the power of situation to override individual character. But his framing stopped short of the deeper question. The situation worked because the neural hardware was already installed. The capacity for dominance behavior, for rapid in-group out-group sorting, for treating an out-group member as a resource or threat rather than a person. These are not learned. They are retrieved. Neuroscientist Gene DeCidi at the University of Chicago has spent years mapping the brain's response to observed suffering. Under ordinary conditions, watching another person in pain activates empathy circuitry. But DeCidi's research demonstrated that when the suffering individual is categorized as an outgroup member, those circuits dampen. In a significant proportion of subjects, watching an outgroup member in pain activated reward circuitry instead of empathy circuitry. Not in people with personality disorders. In ordinary people. This is the switch. Ancient humans did not lack empathy. They had a context-dependent empathy system that could be toggled by group membership. You still have the switch. David Buss at the University of Texas has documented across dozens of cultures that homicidal ideation, a clear, specific, detailed fantasy about killing a particular person, is not rare. In multiple surveys, a majority of male respondents reported having experienced this. The system that produced it is not broken. It is working exactly as designed. Violence in ancient humans was not a failure. It was a feature. It was woven into the social fabric of every prehistoric community we have found, on every continent. across every time period we have been able to study. The modern world did not change this. It constructed a system of constraints around it. Those constraints are effective, most of the time, for most people. The ancient software does not receive those updates. It runs underneath. Lawrence Keeley called prehistory a Hobbesian war, not in the sense of constant chaos, but in the sense that violence was a permanent structural possibility that organized everything else. The walls contain the pressure, but they are walls, not replacements. What does that mean for you? It means the thing your ancestors were is not a historical artifact. It is a dormant system, sitting behind every social interaction you have. The composure at the beginning of this video, the cold scan of the tree line, the suppression of hesitation. That was not a portrait of someone else. That was a portrait of the part of you that has never changed. But violence is only one of the systems they left running. There is another, quieter and closer to home. Because while your ancestors were eliminating threats outside the group, they were running a parallel operation inside it, shaping loyalty, enforcing hierarchy, selecting who survived and who didn't, using mechanisms that had nothing to do with weapons. That system is even older than the violence, and it runs in your closest relationships right now, beneath your awareness. The name for it exists. Once you know it, you will not be able to stop